Hello kind people, this is Svidler with the recap of round 5 of Tata Steel Wijk tournament 2019, which on the day was not actually played in Wijk. This was one of the touring rounds, so to speak, tradition that this tournament has been trying to establish for the past, I think, around 5 years, and the round was actually played in Alkmaar, which puts some additional pressure on the players to adjust their daily routines and so on. But on the other hand, it obviously gives a chance for people in places other than Wijk to see the best players in the world in action. So it generally is a good idea. And the round was quite interesting, and choosing a game of the day wasn't that easy. Jan Gustafsson covered the other obvious choice, a victory by the world champion. I hope I'm not spoiling very much here. But I chose the game that Ding Liren played with the black pieces against the US champion Sam Shankland. So let's have a look at this. Sam generally plays every single first move, as I learned, to my great delight, frankly, because it meant that I don't really have to prepare for a match, as I don't when preparing for the match I played against him in October. But today he chose to open with 1e4, I guess prompted by the fact that Ding is a very classical player, plays all kinds of proper Ruy Lopez's, not the Berlin, and getting a game in those variations generally is quite possible. And Ding Liren stays true to form, goes for the Spanish, and then threatens Sam with Marshall, which generally people don't really allow these days. There are some notable exceptions. MVL won some games against the classical Marshall in the past, I don't know, 5 years, but all in all, most people don't really allow the Marshall, and the main anti-Marshall of these days, I think, is 8a4, where play can continue. For instance, before a5, d6, d3 has been a line very, very widely discussed in recent years. But Sam goes for 8h3, the other major anti-Marshall line here. Ding plays bishop b7, d3. And here there is a lot of theory connected with the pawn sacrifice d5, ed5, knight d5, knight e5. And here both knight takes e5, rook takes e5, queen d6 is a very serious line. And also knight d4, which used to be the main move in this position, then was supplanted by knight takes e5, and then was sort of brought back to life by the fact that Magnus Carlsen played this successfully, drawing without really any effort against Sergei Karyakin in their World Championship match in New York in 2016. But Ding decides to play it sort of old style, just playing d6 here and saying to Sam, okay, show me what you've got in the old theory. And originally the idea of playing h3 and then d3 was connected specifically with the idea of playing a3 in this position, preserving the bishop. Of course, having played d6, black is now threatening to play knight a5. Corralling and trading the bishop on b3 for the knight on c6, which is generally considered to be excellent for black. So a3 is a possibility, after which black has about 7 different moves even in this position alone, and some of them are still connected with different plans, so there's a tremendous variety of things black can do here. And also, of course, white can play a4 here, transposing to other reasonably well-known positions. In particular, there's this line knight a5, bishop a2, c5, and after knight bd2, the main move is b4. But there is also this weird move b5 takes a4, which has been championed quite successfully by the Russian Grandmaster Evgeny Tomashevsky. Instead of all that, Sam goes 10 c3, once again preserving the bishop, giving the bishop the square on c2. But switching to anti-Marshalls, which aren't supposed to be as venomous as those positions with a3 and a4, but still very well known and very playable, of course, nothing wrong with this. Goes knight a5, bishop e2, bishop c2, sorry, c5, knight bd2, rook e8. This is all very, very normal. Black is playing sort of the normal Chigorin setups here with black against the pawn on d3 and not on d4, which makes the development of the bishop on b7 slightly questionable. Common wisdom says that if white plays d3, it is generally better for black to develop this bishop to e6, or maybe in some cases to d7, because on b7 it is sort of severely restricted by the pawn pair on d3 and e4 and does a lot less work. But as compensation for this, obviously white is playing a much slower game here. Knight f1, h6. You generally, once again, as a rule, don't play bishop f8 in these positions without restricting the bishop from coming to g5. It's not like this position is immediately completely horrible for black or anything, but allowing bishop g5 is kind of frowned upon, and people normally start by playing h6. And here Sam already made a slightly unorthodox decision. Normally white still pushes for the d3, d4 break. You can play extremely slowly, like something like knight g3, bishop f8 and knight h2. There was a recent game in which Sergei Zhigalko played this against a much weaker opponent in Minsk and did not get anywhere at all after d5, queen f3, d4, which is a very normal continuation for black in these types of positions. But either the immediate d4 in this position, or you could play knight g3 and after bishop f8 play d4. These are really, really well known. I myself found out that I played this against Dmitry Yakovenko in one of the Russian superfinals 11 years ago. And black still has to be somewhat careful. Yakovenko replied by taking everything off in the center and playing rook c8, which is a very playable approach. Or you could also, as has been seen in a Grand Prix game between Dominguez and Kamsky, you could also go cd5, cd4, cd4 and play the immediate d6, d5, aiming for a break in the center, and this also leads to very playable and decent positions for black. Instead of all this, Sam played knight e3. Not a mistake as such, but by placing the knight on this square, you are more or less saying, I will not be pushing for any kind of d3, d4 play, because the pawn on e4 is now never going to be protected enough. And after bishop f8, here in the studio, we very much expected Sam to continue knight h2 with the ideas of knight g4, the queen sometimes comes out to f3. And there was once again a reasonably recent game in which Luke McShane played this against Mark Hebden, and the game continued d5, knight g4, black took, takes, de, rook a d8, queen e2, bishop c8, and the game was eventually drawn and black did not seem particularly troubled. You could maybe argue that in this position the immediate d takes e4 is stronger than knight takes f6, but what you have to say is that knight h2 is, I believe, the logical continuation if you play knight e3 on move 14. But Sam made a very rare move in this position. He thought for a while and played b2, b4. This has actually been played by the famous Russian player Nezhmedinov, I believe in the 60s or maybe even earlier than that. I forgot to check properly which year the game was dated, and black did not take on b4 in that game and played knight c6, which would sort of justify white playing b4. But Ding reacted correctly. On b4, played knight c6. The pawn is now hanging, so you have to play a3. And white is sort of one tempo away from being extremely happy about things if the bishop lands on b3, establishing control over the d5 square. But Ding, of course, has none of it. He plays d5 himself. And amazingly, well, you can say b4 maybe is inaccurate, but I think you can sort of claim that the next move is the decisive mistake in this game, and it really is not shocking at all. It's a decision I guess you can suspect is not correct, but to say that it will be punished so severely, we did not really... I remember distinctly that when it appeared on our screens during the live broadcast, and people started telling us that the machine severely dislikes this move and says that Sam is now in trouble. It took me a very long time to sort of believe it and or realize why, because it just didn't seem like it's a huge problematic move. What white should have done here, especially with the benefit of hindsight and understanding what the threats are, is just immediately take some pressure off in the center by taking on d5, playing bishop b3, and then bishop b2, establishing this pressure against the e5 pawn. Black always has enough counterplay with a6, a5 here that there is no question of white really playing for a win here. But he should equalize after both a5, ba, knight takes a5, and you can take with the bishop on e5 here. Even here after queen d7, black, despite being a pawn down, is the side playing for advantage for sure. But white still equalizes with precise play here. And if black goes rook a d8, white is sort of okay with both rook e3 and queen e2. Both of these moves lead to objective equality, even though, once again, in both cases, I believe it is black who is playing for a win here. And instead of all that, went knight g4. And this position is very, very bad for white already. And he had, I think, one more realistic chance to save the game after that. That would have given him a shot at least. And this is the reason I like this game by Ding so much, is that in a game against an extremely strong player, he punishes what amounts to one seemingly absolutely normal move, which, yes, the computer says it is an inaccuracy, so severely that Sam basically never comes back into this game. Knight takes g4, hg, d takes e4. You can start with a6, a5, but there's absolutely no reason to complicate matters by giving white additional options like ed5 here. So d takes, queen takes, rook takes, and a6, a5. And because black is the first to start all this play on the queen side, it turns out that white's queen side is extremely weak. And also, in many variations, somewhat surprisingly, this pawn on g4, which normally this trade of knights on g4 in the appearance of the h3 pawn on g4 is a good thing for white in Spanish positions, because it creates additional ideas of g4, g5, and they teach you in school, so to speak, that capturing towards the center is good. But here it's a lot more important that this pawn will be hanging. And you will see this in the game, and you will also see it in the variation which Sam should have gone for in this particular position. He took on a5, which we also thought must be the only move in this position. But after that, I think his position maybe is objectively beyond repair. And I don't think he stood much of a chance of saving the game after playing ba5. And it is a very, very natural move. What he should have done is play, rook d7. Black plays bishop c8, rook c7, knight d8. First of all, these two moves are not that natural, but they are strong. And in this position, you take on a5, and black has a choice. You can take on g4 first, keeping the pawn on a5 for the future. But white can play bishop d2, bishop d6. Rook only has one square. Black takes. Sorry, there was a bit of a lag there, so I'll show this again. Rook c3, rook takes a5, rook b3, and black still has some advantage after b5, b4, forcing to take with pieces twice, and now we take on f3 and go knight e6. And because of how weak the f4 and d4 squares are, black still will be playing this for a win. But in general, it is a 4 against 4 position where white also has an outside passer, so he shouldn't be that disappointed with the outcome. Black has a stronger options though. He can play knight e6 here. And if white goes timidly all the way back to c3, black takes on a5. Threat is b4, of course. Rook b1, and in this position both knight d4 and in particular knight f4. Once again, attacking this stupid pawn on g4 and also creating this threat of a fork is just extremely unpleasant for white. But white has the option of playing rook c6, bishop d7, rook b6, bishop c5. The rook gets trapped in the corner, but you can make a black take on b6 immediately, and you create this weird-looking passer on b6 right behind the pawn on b5. It's a bit of a strange pawn structure. And I left the machine running here for a while, and it seems like after f7, f6, which is the best move, black is still better, but white definitely has significant chances to not lose this game at all. Whereas after ba5, knight takes a5, and it's a very important take with the knight. First of all, the threat will be knight c4, and secondly, after rook b1, which is what Sam played here, Black plays bishop c6, completely ruling out all of the ideas of ever trading the pawn on a3 for the pawn on b5 by playing a3, a4. Yeah, this position is just incredibly bad because there's really no good defense against knight c4, and the pawn on a3 is terminally weak. During the live show, I was arguing for playing bishop d2 first to just sort of cut the problem out at the source and just give up on a3 for some activity. But the activity turns out to be illusory because in this position, black doesn't really need to hang on to material. He can rook e7, takes, knight takes e5, and in particular, a very strong move, bishop f6, driving the knight back to f3 because really no other squares are good. And then you can play bishop c8. And once again, with the pawn on h3, this would have been a difficult endgame for white. With the pawn on g4, I have a feeling it's just not one white can hold. Then b1 instead, bishop c6. Once again, knight c4 is a threat that you have to make an extremely awkward move, knight d2, rook e d8. Ding is in no hurry. Computer also says you can play knight c4 straight away and pick up on a3, but I think rook e d8 is much stronger in practical terms because it's also incredibly difficult for white to get anything at all going with this cluster of pieces, none of which have any squares. Goes king f1, at least attempting to bring the king towards the center. And here I believe the computer says that rook a c8 is basically winning on the spot. And you know, if there is a blemish on Ding's conversion in this game, it's that he didn't play rook a c8 here, but he'd never really let go of his advantage. And the point is, once again, that you create a threat of bishop d7, hitting the pawn on g4 and the bishop on c2. And if white plays f3, black goes bishop d7. It's slightly more clever than bishop e8 because it stops even counterplay with knight b3. After bishop e8, white has this clever move, knight b3. White is still much worse here, but at least he gets to trade some pieces. And after bishop d7, knight b3, knight c4 is just completely horrible for white. He never really comes out of the corner here. And if white plays d3, you see the first appearance of the threat which eventually finished the game in the actual game as well. Black can play b4, b4, and bishop a4. And white's position just collapses here. Everything is hanging. Instead of all that, Ding played knight b7, which is also a very sensible idea, attacking the pawn on a3. And here, Sam made a move rook b3, which is very understandable from a human perspective. You're trying not to give up your pawn on a3, not to allow black to have an outside passer. But he should have just realized how horrible his position is and tried to buy his freedom, so to speak, by playing bishop b2, sorry, b3, bishop b2, black plays f6. And here, once again, I wasn't surprised, but it was still quite striking to see the computer evaluating this position, for instance, as I think close to -3 on my screen. Despite this, for the time being, being complete material equality. Machine thinks white is just lost here because he will never really get any coordination going. So it suggests going rook bc1, creating the threat of bishop b3 check. Black plays king h7, knight b1, rook takes d1. Once again, you would like to take with the rook here, but after b5, b4, you have to resign because ab loses to rook a2. So the machine takes with the black takes on e4. And maybe in some ideal scenarios, you will be able to trade the b5 pawn for the a3 pawn. And then you do have some drawing chances. So this was a better option. Let's say you play bishop e2 here on e3 followed by bishop e2. That was a better choice than what Ding played, than what Shankland played. He played rook b3, and after rook b3, basically the position can really no longer be saved. Ding played bishop d7, which is a very strong move. Once again, rook a c8 with the whole threat is stronger than execution vibe was even better, but nothing wrong with bishop d7 as well. Here, once again, the computer suggests that it's time to just pawn on g4 by playing knight f3, f6, and something like knight e1. And black just goes knight c5, takes on g4 next move. There is really no question whatsoever that black should eventually win this game. But Sam continued trying to preserve his material, played f3, and now after rook ac8 his position just collapses tactically because there's really no squares for this bishop. It has to go back, and black just wins by playing b5, b4, creating this threat of bishop a4. And what's more, the rooks on the D and C files mean that White in most cases will not even be able to buy his freedom with just the one exchange, because for instance here, after takes, black goes bishop a4 and collects a full piece on the c1 and d2 squares, so White just resigns here. Sam tried playing rook b2, hoping to use the fact that b takes a3 runs into rook takes b7. But Ding showed him how futile the resistance is. He played bishop a4, rook e1, and a very nice, very quiet move, rook c7, creating a threat of b takes a3 because the knight is protected. White takes on b4, black just goes rook dc8 and picks up the bishop on c1, which was left completely blocked in by its own pieces, and there's no way to protect it, so you can resign here as well. After rook c7, Sam played bishop a2, trying to activate at least one piece, but this never happens because after ba, the rook actually gets chased down and more or less captured. After rook b1, it has to go to some unfortunate squares. And the same applies to rook b6, which is what Sam played. Bishop c5, rook b1, bishop c2, and now this is hanging. Bishop d3 is more or less mate if you allow it, so at this point Sam decided that enough is enough and resigned. So all in all, a very, very impressive victory by Ding Liren, who played a quiet, very, very classical Spanish, developed his pieces properly, and then when given an opportunity, he struck very, very efficiently and very, very cleanly. And as I mentioned, from the moment Sam played knight g4, he had basically one half-decent chance to save the game, and once he did not take that, Ding Liren was never looked in any danger of letting his advantage slip. So a very, very nice victory with the black pieces for the Chinese number one. In other results of the round, as I already sort of mentioned, Magnus Carlsen finally broke his drawing streak by destroying Jordan van Foreest on the black side of the 95 Sveshnikov, bringing the score in this tournament so far after 9 rounds. We've had, sorry, 9 rounds, 5 rounds. After 5 rounds, we've had 70 games. What am I saying? Why 70? I'm being a bit stupid here. It's 35 games, obviously, 7 per round. So out of 35 games, 11 were decisive, and 9 of those were won by people playing black, which is a very striking statistic and not something you see in elite tournaments very often. I still expect this to even out towards the end of the tournament, but it's a statistic definitely worth mentioning because of how rare it is. And the score could have been higher because towards the very, very end of the round, young Vidit missed a very, very good chance of beating Vladimir Fedoseev after a very nicely played game by Vidit, and that would have increased the score in favor of black and also would have brought Vidit to a share of first, which after he did not win is now occupied by Jan Nepomniachtchi, who drew with a rapport with the white pieces today, and Ding Liren, who with this victory also joins him on 3.5 out of 5. Tomorrow is the rest day, so make sure to join us for the live show on Friday, once again, 1:30 p.m. Central European, with the continued coverage of Tata Steel Wijk Tournament 2019. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching. And this has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.